This episode of the CUInsight Experience podcast is sponsored by Alacrity, a leading payments fintech helping credit unions modernize money movement. Alacrity enables real-time money movement experiences for loan payments, A2A transfers, digital disbursements, and bill pay. Through a single cloud-native platform that connects to RTP, FedNow, FedWire, ACH, Visa Direct, and Zelle, credit unions can progressively modernize without overhauling legacy systems. Learn more at alacrity.com.
Welcome back to the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and I am here again with my co-host, my partner in podcasting and life, Jilly Nowacki.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jilly Nowacki, founder and CEO of Humanidei.
Last episode, we kicked off this season talking about purpose and why it matters and why leaders are craving it right now, Jill.
And today builds on that, but in a more personal way. We've both learned that leadership looks very different as you live it than it does when you study it or you read about it.
That is so true. So today we're going to talk about something that cuts across all of that experience that we both had.
The best part of leadership.
And I'd like to start here. When you're building something from nothing, which both of us have done with others, leadership becomes kind of incredibly personal. I know over the years of CUInsight, especially in the very beginning, that people are like, don't take this personal. It was hard for me not to take anything personal about CUInsight when David and I were first building it. So, and if you think about it, early on, when the company doesn't have a history, people aren't joining a company. They're trusting in you and in that vision that you have. And that's a lot of trust.
Yeah, and it's true because not everybody listening to this is a founder. I think it's true for new CEOs when they're coming in with a new vision, a new direction, a new brand as well. And I felt it as a league president, but I really felt it when I founded Humanidei. And there's this moment you realize when you're hiring people that you're not just recruiting them on the company vision, you're recruiting them on whether or not they want to work with you too. So they're not just buying into the work, buying into what you do. They're buying into you as a leader and that vision you have.
I think that's so important bringing that up because we've had quite a few friends over the past few years who have become CEOs at credit unions, right? And many times there is a change. People have longevity in our industry often. And if you're coming in and you're replacing that CEO of 20 years and you're like, and the board probably hired you because of the energy that you're going to bring. And it doesn't mean that they were unhappy with the old one always, right. But it's like, well, if we're making a change, let's this fresh new start. So that idea of whether it's people that were already at the credit union for many years or as you're building your team, talking about that vision that you're bringing in, I think that's very similar to that kind of founder mindset where it's like that passion. And I can tell you just from a personal experience, I never forget it. When we were hiring someone early on, a woman decided to take another job that she felt was more secure because we were a young company. And it was between two jobs. And I'm like, that job seems boring compared to what you're doing, right? It just didn't fit everything she talked about in her value thing. But she literally said, well, they made me this offer and it wasn't about money. It was about perceived stability. So obviously didn't really buy into the vision of what, I had put out there then. So,
well,
that's fine. It's
what I would say is on that, there's another factor that comes in too, which is how somebody's personal values show up. And so if she had a personal value of stability or security, then potentially that side of it comes in too. And so that is so key because I think when we talk about buying into leadership, we definitely talk about the idea of buying into vision, philosophy, mission. We work with credit unions, so from mission to mission, some of them sound pretty similar. We're here to help people. We're people helping people. We're here to serve our whole community. And the way we do that may vary from time to time too. So another area to really think about as leaders and as we're working to get folks to buy into us does come into that philosophy we create, but also the way we lead, the style with which we lead too.
One thing as we're early on in this conversation, again, when we were kind of thinking through it and talking about the idea of it, the thing that I kept coming back to is one of my favorite parts and I know it's something that both Dave and I share over the years of CUInsight, is watching the people grow along with us. We've had obviously people that have been team members who have went on to other things and bigger positions. I obviously would think about Lauren being at the foundation now. And it's something that, quite honestly, like her getting her CEO start at CUInsight, something we're very proud of. And then also, I mean, people that are still with us, like watching John over more than 10 years or Robbie after more than 10 years with us, to see the change over the course of a decade as in that career, that to me, and to watch those roles evolve and to watch them become a part of the credit union movement that they weren't before, and others on the team as well. That's something that's kind of cool when you do pause for a second and kind of look back and go, huh, that's pretty awesome. Like over the past 17 years or 18 years or whatever it's been.
And it's interesting because you're talking about, because there may be some leaders out there that are like, yeah, I invested all this time in my people and then they moved on. How hard was that? Or the flip side to that is somehow believing that the folks who have stayed for 20 years or 30 years are maybe, well, they stayed because they didn't have any better options, for example. And it reminds me, there was a book I read years ago, and you and I talked about this concept from it of the difference between a rock star and a shooting star or a superstar. And that idea of, as a leader, when you see the premise is that the solid folks, the ones who stay and perform high, those rock stars, when you see them thrive and grow inside the company. But then when you see those superstars or shooting stars go off and become the executive director of the foundation, there can be so much growth that comes with both of those.
Absolutely.
And as a leader, being able to recognize the way you impact that growth in both types of team members, I think is really interesting. And I've seen that as a CEO within my own teams, but I get to see that as well working with credit union CEOs, because there is that, and particularly from a recruiting side, where I get people who will call me and say, it's so bittersweet. Like, it's with such mixed emotions right now that I'm calling you. I have to fill this position. But it is.
Think about,
so
a
cool,
longtime friend of the podcast. He's been on a few times. We all in the industry talk about Mike Valentine and like his coaching tree and all of those people. And yet he has this amazing core inside his credit union too, right? Who've been there for many years with him and saw his vision. So, and there's many others, I mean, besides Mike, that we know who are doing similar things. But I always find it's interesting. And after this comes up, we're not going to be too far off from GAC again. But there's those times where you're standing around and you're having the glass of wine or the cocktail, or you're at the reception and somebody comes up who grew up either in the organization or moved on and went to another credit union and is now a CEO there. And you can almost see the joy on the person's face. That's like, yeah, it's one of mine. Like there's that proudness. Yeah. I can tell you, like, I know it. Like last year at the Herb Wagner dinner, watching Lauren up on stage, I was sitting there, and I know you were too. There was like this proudness, right? Like it's like, yeah, that's our girl. It was just so. I mean, there's something to that. I want to ask the question though: why do you think that part of leadership so often is easy to overlook? We've kind of set a goal for ourselves to keep this season about purpose and positive, but it's so often when we're in the middle of it, because we all go through stuff, ups, downs, we get distracted by things even outside of our organizations. Why is it so easy to overlook kind of that part of leadership that we've seen in so many people just lights them up when they talk about it, but often it gets left out?
Yeah, well, I think it can be hard to reflect on. We'll use Lauren as an example. But when you pause and think about that, or somebody comes up and says, oh, tough loss losing Lauren from CUInsight, like a couple of years ago, right, when she had made the move, in that moment, it's easy to say, oh, yeah, but look how proud we are of her. And then next Tuesday, when you've got to go through the work of, again, talking 2 years in the past, but you got to go through the work of finding the CEO and hiring the CEO and onboarding the CEO, the attention is not focused on celebrating that success of what's been done in the past. It's focused on how do we get where we need to be in order to keep moving forward.
Well, you find a Greg, obviously, right? I mean,
and now
now we celebrate that. It's been amazing.
And so I mean, there is this reality that the day-to-day draws our attention. And sometimes it's even true with the people side. One of the reminders that leaders often need is to make sure that they are investing their energy in their high performers, their high potential high performers. because it can be really easy to overlook them. They're not very demanding usually. So
Yeah,
we
a lot
know
of the time it is the squeaky one, right? Like it's the one
we know they're going to get the job done. We know they're going to do what it takes to move forward. Oftentimes they're taking control of their own development, so we're not pushing them along. But then we don't get to feel that joy that comes when we're alongside them working on it and seeing those wins and helping them move forward to the highest potential.
Such an interesting thing, though, because I know you and I have had many conversations, even when it comes around like, Humanidei or CUInsight. And I know Dave and I have the conversations with Greg all the time where we see somebody who's like inside the organization who's doing something amazing. And it's like, ooh, is there a lot of potential there? What do we need to keep developing?
Yeah.
That seems amazing. Where it's like looking for those opportunities because you're like, ooh, they've shown growth.
Yeah.
So instead of focusing on, we need to fix something, but this one's like, ooh, they've potential growth, whatever it could be. How do we unleash that? So yeah, I find that interesting.
I had a wonderful call with a CEO this week, and she's starting to look toward her retirement in the next year or so. And so she's pausing a little bit right now to say, okay, what is it time to do? And so technically she brought us in for what would be considered a succession plan, but it's truly a transition project that she's looking at. And as she and I were talking about the work this week, and what just was so evident was her care and concern, both what she's invested in her people over her career, but also really where she's looking at seeing it go coming forward. And it's so evident. And so to me, I look at that and I say, okay, she's got decades of service to this credit union. She can look back on all of these different things. But right now, as she's making it, what means the most to her is, does she have these people ready for her transition?
Isn't that something? Because it is, I mean, to kind of go back to that question, there really aren't performance metrics that your board is probably going to give you as a CEO. That's like, how many good people can you lose from the organization, right? Like to move on and become CEOs. That doesn't, I mean, I know that development, that's the people business that you're in. So that tends to be, but that doesn't tend to be like the measurable one often. Like it's not the numbers and it's not even the member satisfaction type scores or anything. So to me, that is one of the reasons that maybe sometimes we overlook it. We've had the opportunity on the podcast last year, since you've been co-hosting and I have over the years, where we get to talk to these amazing leaders who have long careers. And to me, when we were starting to talk about this episode, that was one of the things that got me a little bit excited about it, was this idea that so many of them that have been on the podcast, it's like what they want to talk about. I think we did one last year with Time Hughes about legacy. Mm-hmm. His legacy was about people. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like there was more conversation around people than it was about the numbers. And I think that's, but we don't have to be receiving the Lifetime Achievement Awards to be thinking about that. So I do hope it's something that, like, as people are listening today, that it's like, let's pause. Maybe you're only a year or two into being a CEO or a leader, to say, oh, how do I feel about the people side?
Yeah, it's interesting. On the other side to that, too, I'm just thinking about this when we check references for candidates right now. We don't typically hear, boy, you should see what that person did with the numbers. Like we hear about this person was so respected. This person, they navigated through this crisis or this challenge. And even those, so yes, absolutely. When people are giving speeches at retirement parties, they're not typically like, did you see that one's ROA? It always comes down to how leaders made our people feel. And that's what can be tricky, because the leaders are walking this balance, because they have to run an organization where the people are cared about and where they're building the culture and working with the folks who need to get the work done. And they're being evaluated on things other than just the people side of it. And so it's critically important that they get those numbers right. You can't keep your people employed, let alone developed, if there's no net income, or if the reputation is compromised, or if the regulator shuts you down.
There's got to be growth. I mean, if there's not growth, that means you're going backwards and we're not going to be around for very long. So the one thing, though, thinking about that, too, is from a leadership perspective, and when you are that kind of the one who, the buck stops here type of a thing, sometimes to let your superstars or your shining stars or your rock stars or whatever terms we want to use shine, sometimes it's making the tough decision where there's somebody who just doesn't fit here. So that's I think, and oftentimes that's maybe where our focus tends to lie on a day-to-day, is like, okay, this person's not fitting in, this person's not performing, this person's whatever. But sometimes to let the others do even better, it's like, okay, my job as the leader to kind of let's smooth out this mess so that we can move forward, move on, move upward. So just another tangent. How about that? So
no, it's absolutely a reality. And it's another element too. At the beginning of the podcast today, we were talking about the concept of when someone joins an organization, and we were talking about it from the founder standpoint, and the idea of you're not just buying into the work, you're buying into the leader too. I think sometimes in credit unions, we see people who work in the same institution for a very long time, and maybe we see them work there through different CEOs and different iterations of vision and passion and values. And sometimes I have heard team members say, I don't really like the direction right now, but I'm just going to wait it out. I'm going to see if it changes, or I'm going to see if the CEO turns over again, because I've been here 20 or 30 or 40 years, so I can outlast that. And this concept, and I think it's true on a team member level, when you're your team member, maybe not underperforming from a technical standpoint, but they just shouldn't be there. And maybe it is they don't buy into the vision, or they didn't like the core provider that was picked, or they didn't like something, and they're kind of sort of quietly protesting what's going on by not getting all the way in. There's this concept that I've been reflecting on a bit from an author speaker named Cy Wakeman. And the idea is you stay in joy or you go in peace.
Yeah,
and that
right.
I think so many people would be, as team members, would be better to do that for themselves. But I think that's really what leaders also need to look for in this idea of, if you want that highest impact development and growth for your team, you need to look for those team members who are staying in joy and double down on them, work with them, help them keep feeling that joy. But if you are noticing those sort of quietly resistant ones, help them gracefully exit.
Yeah. And like you said, hopefully they do see that for themselves. Because if you don't like the vision or where it's going and it doesn't feel good to you, gosh, don't want anybody working in something that they...
It's not good for anyone.
No,
right?
we spend a lot of time together. You want to be in that joy moment, right? Like that's for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about the concept of what matters in leadership, and we talked a bit about kind of the ups and downs of it both. But when you think about your 17 years of building, what does positive leadership look like to you?
Oh, there's been this interesting thing, I think, over the progression of my journey over the time since Dave and I started CUInsight. And part of that has been, in the beginning, when it was just the two of us, it was just kind of about trying to get by and survive, right? Like more than anything, and can make this a go. And you've heard me say it, and other people have heard me say it before. From the time we hired our first employee, it became putting mac and cheese on our kids' plates. You know, like the responsibility shifted. And there have been moments watching employees buy their first house, get a new car, do whatever, have kids. And you're like, wow, this creation is now providing real life to people. And that to me is never lost on me. And I think it's kind of one of those things that keeps going. And then as it's transitioned, I mean, it's been 6 years now since Dave and I have had that kind of active CEO type level leadership position in the company. And we've switched to more of like a working board members, like whatever you want to call it, but like that founder mentality. And so from that standpoint, that's had to switch too. It's like we still hear the stories, but we're not involved as much day to day in the individual lives. But it is then, it was whether it was working with Lauren or it's working with Greg to not only watch their development and like their continued growth and hope for their joy in their position, but also like making sure that our values for growth are still flowing through all the way, right? And supporting them in it too. If it's like, I think about it, over the past few years with both these amazing CEOs that we've had, we start to see a pattern. There's something in it that's causing friction. And we're a pretty close-knit team at CUInsight. Yeah. If there's a friction point, Dave and I both have, I think, felt that we're like, we got your back. Whatever you decide to do here, day to day what's best for this team, and by team, the organization, right? And being able to have those kind of conversations doesn't mean that something's going to change tomorrow. But, and on the flip side of that, the amount of times that, I kind of mentioned it earlier, that we ask questions about those rock stars. Like, and the amount of times that like we'll ask more questions when during a conversation it slipped in that somebody just did this great job. Oh, they've taken on more responsibility. Oh, really? Okay, that's awesome. Tell us more. You know, I mean, like where we want to hear that side of the story. So that the numbers all come out right in the beginning. It's like, okay, cool. Business is doing well now. And if those numbers are a struggle, there's ups and down times, we probably spend more time on them. But to me, when things are running smooth, then it's like we do spend way more time on the people side of thing and how people are doing and that type of a thing. So I think for me, it is over time. There's been a transition there have been many, many transitions of my individual involvement from a leadership perspective. But there's been one thing that since the very first employee we ever had at CUInsight has never changed. And that's like, it's going to sound like a more technical thing, but my fiduciary responsibility to contribute to their well-being and to provide that space that they can grow financially. They can support their families. They can support themselves. They can have that growth that they're looking for. They can have fulfilling careers. And that to me is, I'm saying all this, it's on a podcast and it makes me smile.
Yeah. There's a quote I've used no less than a dozen times from Maurice Smith. Obviously, you know this, but the former president and CEO at local government federal credit union in North Carolina. And Maurice and I were on a panel together, and he made this statement like, when you become a leader, there is a weight that comes with it. And I like feeling that weight of leadership. And the other end of the spectrum on that is if somebody says, hey, the obligation we have to the employee is their paycheck, and the obligation they have to us is to do their job. And that's it. That's where it ends. And that's very different than this weight you're talking about, where it's not like, I'll pay you for the days you come in, and then if something happens, then company goes away or you like, then our relationship is done. And I think that concept of the weight of leadership is that idea of you're going to give something up to join this organization. You're going to leave another position to come work here. You're going to give up time with your friends or family. And while contractually it may be true that the trade-off is your time for your paycheck, I do think that the best companies are those who really hold that humanity in very high regard and say, like, we recognize too, it's not just about the certainty of you knowing you'll get a paycheck. It's also about you feeling safe in this place, that there's not a risk of you losing your job, of the company going under. And so it was really, when you said the story earlier about the team member or the, I guess, non-team member, because she didn't end up joining your team, because she was afraid of the stability of the company. And it's like, there's a part of me that's like, oh, did that hurt your feelings a little bit? Because you're like, of course I'm going to give you stability when you join in.
There is a reason why probably 15, 16 years later, I still talk about it. I think it maybe stung a little bit, but to me, it was motivating. And the really interesting part is the woman went to work for a builder in Greenville, South Carolina, that then ended up going under.
Oh, no.
Like a few years. No. And they were like a multi-generation business, right? So, and I'm not going to say we took any joy in them going under, but Dave and I are like, well, we're still around.
Yeah, right.
Like, yeah, you know, I mean, like, all right, hey, good on us, more than bad. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't, but there was a bit of an ego hit at the time where it was like, what do you mean? What? That's like some old, boring, stodgy, like, we're fun.
Right.
Like, have you not seen our open offices at the time? We don't have offices now, but like, we might have had a ping pong table. I don't think we ever did, but you know, like we had a bike rack and we all did stuff fun. But yeah, one thing I want to focus on, we're talking longer about this than I thought we would. So it's obviously a good conversation. You were excited about it. I was like, I think I got some stuff. I think I've talked more on this podcast than I have in the past year. No, but anyways, to kind of like bring this full circle, that idea of like what inspires leaders over the long haul, because I mean, we've touched on it, but like there are seasons of inspiration, and sometimes that inspiration is hard to come by. And when survival or growth is the focus, it's kind of, sometimes it's, I don't think when growth is the focus, but when, you know, like survival is the focus, it's sometimes it's easy to lose that joy, right? I don't think there's a single leader out there, you and I included, or anybody who's listening to this podcast who's been like, it's always been sunshine and rainbows. There's times where it's difficult. What do you think? What's kept you as what I consider a great leader? I come to you for lots of stuff, but like, what keeps great leaders inspired over the long haul, over the career? in your opinion?
Yeah. Candidly, I think one of the things that can keep leaders inspired as well as energized is when they turn that corner and realize, hey, just because I'm in charge, and yes, the buck does stop with me, I don't have to do it all. And so when leaders get to a point where they know where they can contribute at their best and highest value and where their time is best spent, I think that helps free them up to really work on what's inspiring. And to say contributing at their best and highest value, that is different than saying contributing where they're the one who can do it best. Because at the end of the day, I may feel like, probably not so much anymore because it's been a long time since I worked in a functional marketing role and I don't know a lot about a lot of marketing tools today.
Yeah,
but there was probably a long time in my career where I felt like I knew the most about how to reach people and how to tell a story and how to connect to audiences. And there may be things that I could do best or I could do better because I created that thing. Like you may always be best at sales for the CUInsight story or best at telling that story for CUInsight. But there comes a point where the way you contribute needs to shift. And I think what you sometimes see in CEOs is, well, I was the CFO and now I'm the CEO and I'm still best at making the investment strategy. That may be true, but your highest value you contribute is this strategic alignment. It's not running the investment portfolio anymore. And so that knowing what to do and what to delegate matters so much in leaders being able to stay connected to what's most likely to keep them inspired, but also to elevate the inspiration level of the organization too.
I was thinking about something again as we were putting this together, and it's kind of coming full circle back into my mind now when I was listening to you. Is like, for me, early on, there was a survival mode. And that survival mode, I think, led to being a little more transactional than I like in my comfort zone. One of the things in this, as I more deeply was involved and ingrained in the credit union movement, where the relationships mattered more, that it was like, there was a certain sense of, and I think it comes from experience, right, and history, but there was a certain sense of, if you build the relationship, everything else will come. And to me, that's been something that to this day, I think still carries through at CUInsight, where like there is plenty of things that we will do or take the time to do, and we love the conversations that may not lead to any type of business for CUInsight, but it's building those relationships and long-term relationships over time. And I think that same thing holds true internally as it does externally. And my guess is that when you look at many of the successful credit unions, that's holding true too, right? Like where the relationship to the members and the community, there's kind of that long-term vision of it and that purpose behind it that really, as leaders, if you instill that in the organization, if your team members feel that too, and we've probably all, I mean, there's different levels of that. There are people that may come in and be very transactional and their numbers may be fantastic, but do they fit the, if you want to say the culture of, those are great numbers, but what was it at the expense of? So for me, that's something that, I mean, I think that's what always brings it back. Even if times are tough, I can have a great conversation with somebody. We're going to be at Q Symposium here in a week. We'll have GAC coming up after that. There is going to be a certain amount of interaction with people that we've known for years, that even if they are business relationships, they now seem almost more personal relationships too. And that's fun. There's nothing about it seems transactional, you know?
Yeah. It is interesting because I would say sometimes I think in my experience, when I've seen people who are so proud of the numbers they're posting, and when we dig into it a little bit deeper, maybe they move on, we dig into it a little deeper and say, oh, there were some priorities that were set aside or some corners that were cut in this like I'm going to hit all the numbers. Oh, but you didn't follow the right process. You didn't build the relationship. You didn't actually deliver the care and concern that we say is the cornerstone of who we are. And so again, I think just a good reminder that the numbers don't always tell the whole story. And while we do need accountability,
we have to balance both.
Yeah,
as leaders, we have to balance both of them, right?
And that idea when the numbers lead us to being transactional, I think that always leads to trouble. And because in credit unions, especially, the kind of leadership that really ripples and that creates the greatness that we need, it's far beyond just those inside the walls of the organization. It is how we serve our members, how we serve our communities, and how
serve
people
our movement even. I mean, we work with so many people that check all those boxes, right?
For sure. So yeah, it shows up. It shows up in the people. It shows up in the culture, and it really just shows up in how we build our careers too.
Absolutely. So I feel like we went all over the place on this one, which is awesome, and that's my favorite part. We have some exciting things coming up here. I will also say we've got a few guests that we're really excited to have these kind of conversations with. But is there something before we wrap this thing up? Anything that you want to leave the people with, a takeaway, anything of that nature?
Yeah, I guess if there's one thing I want to leave this conversation with is that when you let the sort of, this is going to sound a little like my meditation app for a second, but
is that insight timer still?
Yeah. Making the decision that you can, and I'm using a little romance language here, but meaning it in the least romantic way possible, but choosing the path that puts the greatest amount of love out into the world is probably going to be what creates the greatest success. And that doesn't mean hugs and kisses, but it does mean that making those choices that you show up with the greatest amount of compassion, the greatest amount of humanity, the greatest amount of emphasis and concern for the people and the relationships. I think that those are the leaders who build the teams that get the great results too. That's what shows up. Those are the elements that we remember as we move through our careers. And hopefully on those harder days, those are the moments we remember too, that make the harder days a little easier to get through and the great days even better with that.
I'm going to sound a little bit like the old guy here, and I know it as I say it, and it pains me so much. But I think a lot of this it's not only come from my personal experience, but it's come from like the couple hundred conversations on this podcast. Is many times the part when there have been guests on the show where we've had conversations have sadly been after the recording stopped. And often it comes through on the podcast, but often after the podcast, there's a continued conversation, like after the Zoom button is stopped recording, and what people are proud of, those accomplishments, the things that they are the most proud of, aren't necessarily what they're doing today. And oftentimes there's a marketing person or a communication person who's like, make sure you talk about this awesome thing we're doing. Mm-hmm. And that's not when the questions are asked correctly, and that's what's coming out. It's not that they're so excited about and deeply passionate about. And I'm proud that I think many of these conversations have given people that space that maybe we don't take all the time to reflect back on and go, yeah, that was pretty cool there. That was good. So that's the one thing I would say is to everybody out there as we wrap this thing up is we both encourage you to pause for a moment, take that time, sit down, maybe journal, who knows? But take a moment and ask yourself, who's grown because of your leadership, and to sit back and be proud of it. Because, whether you're building a credit union or leading a credit union or building a company or doing both, the best part of leadership is often the same thing, right? And that's the part that I think in the end, and when we do pause, that makes us smile and what we're the most proud of.
Absolutely. Yes.
Well, thank you everyone for spending time with us today and listening to episode 226 of.
Absolutely. And if today's conversation did resonate, make sure you're subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, and share this episode with another leader who might need this reminder. Maybe share it with the person who helped you grow and build your career. We'll be back soon with more conversations to help you lead with clarity, confidence, and purpose.
Until then, take care, y'all. We look forward to seeing many of you in this upcoming conference season. But until then, we'll be back. Talk to you next time.
Thanks again to Alacrity for sponsoring this episode of the CUInsight Experience podcast. To find out more about Alacrity, visit alacrity.com.